2008 was a wild year for superhero movies. We received a wide-ranging spectrum of films with varying degrees of acclaim and quality. We got to see the birth of the MCU with Iron Man, we saw the Hulk make another comeback to the big screen, and we even got one of the most beloved superhero films of all time with Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight. And hidden away in this treasure chest of caped media from 2008 is Lexi Alexander's neon-soaked and blood-drenched crime drama, Punisher: Warzone.
This is where the Punisher comes in.
Punisher: Warzone is a Lionsgate film that is widely forgotten by the masses, but remembered by fans of the character. This film stars the late Ray Stevenson as Frank Castle, aka the Punisher, and he's about 5 years into his career as a brutal and violent vigilante. But when Frank accidentally crosses the line between hero and villain, he's forced to make things right while also taking down his biggest threat yet. Now, this movie was originally set to be a sequel to 2005's The Punisher, which we covered in a previous episode, and some of the DNA of that script made its way into the final version, and I recall renting this movie when it came out and having a different opinion of it then than I do now. But today, the most important question is, of course, how does this movie hold up all these years later? And really, this is my journey into learning to love The Punisher: Warzone.
No more distractions. We need to focus on my goals.
Now, when I say I'm learning to love this movie, I mean that. When I first saw it, I was still high on how much I loved Thomas Jane's take on the character under the direction of Jonathan Hensleigh in the previous Punisher movie, which is vastly different from this version. I remember being let down by the lack of story, the wooden performances, and general aesthetic of the movie. It was something that left me feeling more distant from the character than ever before, and I wasn't exactly sure how to feel about what I had just watched. The film was directed by successful TV director Lexi Alexander, and she's directed and written for shows like Arrow and How to Get Away with Murder, and the cult classic film Green Street Hooligans, which definitely has some parallels within the direction and aesthetic of this movie as well. Originally, Jonathan Hensleigh was offered to come back, and he planned to make a direct sequel to his Punisher film with Jane returning as the titular character. After multiple setbacks behind the scenes and constant changes to the script, Jane and Hensleigh both dropped out, with Thomas Jane stating the following:
"What I won't do is spend months of my life sweating over a movie that I don't believe in. I've always loved the Marvel guys, and I wish them well."
Jane would of course get a chance to reprise the role one more time in the viral short film called Dirty Laundry, which was an unofficial follow-up to the 2005 film.
You know the difference between justice and punishment.
What?
I also must mention a few important things before we get into the rest of this review. I love Ray Stevenson, and I love him as the Punisher. His build, his age, his attitude, his performance, all of it works for me in this hyper-violent vigilante flick. I actually think Ray Stevenson and his more tactical riot suit look are probably my favorite take on the character when it comes to actually playing the role. Nothing against Lundgren or Jane or Bernthal, but Stevenson is Castle.
I see you anywhere near hell, I'll kick your ass up.
I also want to say that after multiple times watching this movie for research, I've gained a new respect for the entire movie in general, so forgive the criticism throughout this video if you're a die-hard Warzone defender. The movie picks up with Castle already established as the Punisher. He's living in New York City and is fully well known by the city and the police department as a violent criminal hunter. Castle is working with a partner in this movie too, Micro. He's played by legendary funny man Wayne Knight, who serves as Frank's weapons assistant and guy in the chair. Frank heads to take out a local crime family and gets caught up in a firefight with Billy the Beaut, one of the family's top earners. In the process, Frank knocks Billy into a glass crushing machine at a recycling plant and severely disfigures Billy's face.
My looks have nothing to do with this.
This actually is something that I've come to appreciate. See, Billy is presented at first as kind of a pretty boy. He's obsessed with his looks and is known just as much for being handsome as for being violent. In a way, his origin takes on a parallel of Frank's origin, with the only thing Billy truly loves, his looks, getting taken away from him. Now, at first I thought this was silly, but there are multiple points within the movie where Billy, now calling himself Jigsaw, will display how devastated he is about losing his face. Maybe he'll give someone a look when they mention his face, or maybe he'll shed a tear after catching his reflection in the mirror, but I believed it this time. Dominic West is an interesting actor. I wouldn't say he's on the same level as some of the best movie villains, but he certainly is dialed into the silliness and insanity of the role. And make no mistake, this movie is silly. Jigsaw is one of the most popular Punisher villains, but his origin is different depending on what version you're familiar with. But it pretty much always involves a mob dude getting his face destroyed and being very, very unhappy about it. This version, if nothing else, is a deeply layered villain. Jigsaw is unmercifully violent, yet insecure and openly emotional, while at the same time being completely out of his mind insane, but not as insane as his older brother, Looney Bin Jim.
Not Looney Bin Jim, not LBJ, James.
Jigsaw and his men want revenge on Castle, but first they need to break Jigsaw's brother, Looney Bin Jim, out of the mental institution he's being held in.
I'm gonna get my applesauce back.
Jim is crazy. I don't mean crazy like how the Joker's crazy. I'm talking about Hannibal Lecter meets Cletus Cassidy meets that crackhead from Friday. These two guys are very interesting. They clearly love each other in a way that actually seems genuine. They definitely care about each other at the very least, and in that way, there are one or two moments that add some kind of refreshing complexity to these otherwise ridiculous villains. There's a scene where Jigsaw and Looney Bin Jim are recruiting local gangs to help them take out Castle, and it's straight out of a comic book in the most corny yet entertaining way possible. Meanwhile, Castle is looking to retire and isn't aware that Jigsaw and his army are coming for him. See, while half of the movie focuses on the villains and their revenge plot, the other half is telling a much more interesting and heartfelt story. Or at least it's attempting to.
It's a fucked up system you're sworn to protect. Never said it was perfect.
While Frame was taking down the crime family in the beginning, he accidentally shot and killed an innocent undercover police officer. Frank learns that the man he accidentally killed left behind a surviving wife and daughter, and Frank isn't exactly sure how to move on from it. In order to make it right for the family, Frank attempts to deliver them a large sum of the mob's money, which he stole during the opening scene. This brings up a very interesting point in the film that I wish they would have focused on more. Who punishes the Punisher?
Who punishes you?
Similar to Alan Moore's iconic "Who Watches the Watchmen" commentary, this movie calls into question that same principle. Frank killed an innocent person. He took something away from the city that he's dedicated to protecting. Who punishes him for that? Well, unfortunately, that's about as far as the idea goes before we're back in the neon-soaked streets and seeing the most incredibly bloody and disturbing kills that the Punisher has ever done. The violence in this movie is kind of awesome. I used to find it gratuitous, and believe me, it really, really is. But it's also committed to it in a way that makes it fun. We see things like parkour meth heads getting blown up mid-backflip. We get Frank just punching his way through someone's face, and multiple heads exploding right off their shoulders. For Punisher fans who like it rough, this movie doesn't scratch the itch, it skewers it with a decorative sword.
No, everything is not okay. Follow me.
With Jigsaw and his men looking for revenge, they kidnap the wife and daughter that Frank is trying to help and lure Frank into an abandoned apartment complex where hundreds of gang members and killers are waiting for him. The final battle of the movie is by far the most entertaining part of this movie. There's so much to see, and the colors are fully saturated, and the cast is at their most over the top. It's definitely indulgent, it's definitely wacky, and it's definitely awesome. And the color grade of this movie looks like something out of Warren Beatty's Dick Tracy film. Everything is soaked in neon and rain, and it used to look a little too early 2000s for me, but now I kind of appreciate it, and I don't think the silliness of this movie would play through as well if it looked more subdued. It's honestly kind of a pleasant contrast to the utter darkness of the movie's tone. Frank doesn't go into the battle completely alone though. He has a local police accomplice named Detective Soap, who just really wants to be Frank's friend.
I've shadowed his every step for the last 5 years.
This guy is in a whole other movie, if you ask me. It feels like he thought he was acting in something more like Who Framed Roger Rabbit, but it kind of works for me. He's silly, for sure, but he's also real. I mean, he's just a cop who knows he's breaking the law by helping the Punisher, but he's terrified of what'll happen if he doesn't help him. And as a result, he's kind of neutral and a light character that balances out Frank's dark and stoic character. Also forced into the mix is recent transfer agent and former crooked cop Paul Budiansky. He's tough enough to catch and detain Frank, only to end up helping him and letting him go. Kind of.
You're not going there.
In the end, this movie just feels like a classic 80s action film. There's nothing groundbreaking going on, but you'll be entertained and visually stimulated, and if you're a Punisher fan, you might even enjoy it. There's a music video vibe to the cinematography and editing, and it definitely feels sort of kinetic and jumpy, but it does make for an engaging spectacle. The ending of the movie shows Frank being forced to choose between saving Micro, his right-hand man and best/only friend, and the young daughter of the family that Jigsaw kidnapped. It shocked me seeing the way that this scene played out. Frank being forced to choose led to the death of his partner. This moment was surprisingly mature and heartfelt in a way that stands out from the rest of the movie. It really felt like the stakes of the situation were real, and it made it even harder to watch. Frank decides not to retire as he realizes that there's still work to be done for the Punisher. You know, by the time the credits started rolling, I actually gave a shit about this movie. And in the previous times I'd watched it and rewatched it, I couldn't say that was the case. The corny dialogue that once annoyed me suddenly seemed tolerable, and the flashy greens and pinks that used to give me a headache became something fun to get lost in. And the performances that I once considered terrible snapped into perspective, and I understood that these actors were hamming it up on purpose because they knew at the end of the day, Punisher Warzone is fun.
That was fun.
Revisiting this movie was kind of rewarding. I think it's something that I avoided because I assumed that my mind was made up, but for the people that see something in this movie, now I get it.
I mean, contrary to popular belief, people can change.
And for those who still don't like it, I also get it. But one thing cannot be argued. Ray Stevenson rules.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
I'm about to go off like a weapon. Fuel to the top, got a filled up engine. In my thoughts, obsession. I will not stop, no, I'm never second guessing. I got a God complex. Haters love to hate, but I never feel pressed. Got a lot on my plate, but I never get stressed. I'll take all the pressure like I'm acing this test. Tear it up like I'm Jason. I see the world like it's ready for the taking. I see this place like a game I'm playing. Straight to the bank to collect my payments. No negotiations, it's my way, I was born impatient. And like a damn Freemason, I'll run this nation.
They call me a god.